Hi, welcome to In the Rough with Angie. I am here with my new friend Vanessa today. And Vanessa has an amazing story of how she overcame and got out of an abusive situation. She is now married, and God is using her in great ways to just help other moms and encourage other moms. So today we're going to talk about how Vanessa has overcome abuse, and then talk about some things that she's dealing with right now that she's in the rough with, and then some strategies of how she wants to work through those things. So, Vanessa, just to start out so people can get to know you a little bit better, do you have like a favorite childhood
Uh,
memory to
I
share?
do. I guess maybe not a specific, like, time or memory. I just remember playing with my siblings a lot, and being outside. I grew up in the '80s, so, in the '90s. So I just remember having, like, a really good childhood
Yeah.
when a lot of family. I have a big family. I have a lot of cousins, so I just remember, family, really, they've been, big support in my life. So and I have a really close sister to me. She's my younger sister, but we're like only a few years apart. And then I have a brother who is like 10 years younger than me, but we're pretty close too. So
I love that. That's so important in life to have siblings to like back you up and help you out through the process of everything. So that's so cool. So starting out, you had mentioned that your passion is to really help women that have been in abusive situations. So going back in time to when you were in an abusive relationship, how old were you? Like, how did that start?
he's probably about 19. And you know, this person and things were great in the beginning. That's kind of how it always starts. And as the relationship went on, it just kind of started getting, besides like the mental abuse, the controlling, he was definitely a narcissistic person. It did start getting like to the point where it was physical. It that went on for a while. We had lived in an apartment together and I had moved out. We broke up and then I found out I was pregnant. So that kind of situation where, I had to kind of establish contact again, and we tried to get back together. I got a new apartment and the abuse continued while I was pregnant. So that was pretty rough. I remember calling out to God and being like, please protect my baby, save my baby. And at the time, I wasn't living for God. I was kind of, far away from my faith, an opposite direction of how I grew up. I grew up going to church. I grew up in a Christian family. So I just kind of turned away from God, and I contribute that to, this. Oh, so I was, with this person, that I was in this relationship with. He was like the opposite. Like, he didn't even believe there was a God. So I completely, was not living for God and at the time. And so I just remember, praying a lot and being like, protect my baby. And I wasn't really concerned about myself as much at that time. But because, I was getting ready to have a baby, I was more like, turning maternal, and I wanted to, create a home, and all of my attempts to do that, it just, wasn't happening. And so we moved out from that apartment and then to another one because he would just like destroy things and, ruin my life in almost every aspect. And I just kept, letting him come back is what just kept happening. And that's kind of a cycle, the abuse cycle. And so we are, I have the baby and we're together. And, around the time she was about 4 months old, 3 or 4 months old, he came home one night and he was just in a rage. And it got pretty bad, because I had the baby in my arms and he ended up getting the baby away from me, and I was able to call the cops. I was able to call 911. Once he realized that, he like broke my phone and just kind of went crazy. And I was to the point where just felt like I was going to die. Like, I definitely just felt like this is it, right? And I was worried about my baby, mostly, making sure she was okay. And so I don't know what like made him stop at that point. I think it was either maybe the thought of the cops coming or God, I don't know exactly, but he stopped and then like ran out of the house, and he eventually got arrested, and I moved into my parents' house with the baby for a couple months, and I was able to get some like domestic violence help through the city. I got a grant. They helped me get into a new apartment. I even spoke at a domestic violence like fundraising event. So, meeting other people that have been in this situation, it was really it was good, to have that kind of community and know that those resources are out there. So they helped me for a little while. I was severely depressed. I was, like, bad. Like, I didn't wanna leave my house. I didn't wanna leave my daughter to go to work. I didn't even wanna go to the grocery store. I just remember, you know, being in bed a lot and crying. And so I was in, like, a pretty dark place. After he got arrested, he went to rehab, he did some parenting classes, did all the steps to kind of be able to see his kids again, and he has an older daughter from a previous relationship, so my daughter has a sister, and I met her when I met him, she was, like, a year old, so she had been around, kind of witnessing some of the abuse, unfortunately. When he got out and he was my daughter this has been, like okay, so fast forward to, like, my daughter's, like, a toddler, like, 1.5, maybe 2. He got out, he was doing really good, he was getting his life together, establishing communication and supervised visits because I had to kind of share her, and that was kind of hard. I never was scared and concerned about him, like, really hurting her. It was mostly, everything was directed towards me, so that wasn't necessarily a part of my worries as much as, like, I didn't trust him, and I don't like this person, but through the state, he was able to kind of get visitation, and so after all of that, I ended up we almost kind of got back together, in my new house that, I had created with just the 2 of us. I allowed him back in to see his daughter mostly, and that's kind of how it started out, and then we eventually tried to kinda get back together, but eventually the abuse started happening again, and narcissistic people and people like him, they don't change. Even if you go through rehab, even if you go through, the hoops of parenting classes, those kinds of people are just those kinds of people. Unless you find God is what I assume, I hope, right? So, the abuse started happening again, and I was just like there wasn't really this defining moment where I was just like, "Okay, this is done and over with, and this is like that's the end of that." It was kind of like a slow process to get away from him, but I did decide I was just like, "I just don't want this anymore." And at the time, I was able to get a nanny job, and I worked from home with my daughter because I didn't wanna leave. I didn't really wanna, I was still in this depression leading up to kind of and, I wasn't allowing him to come over and see her anymore. I really wanted to, like, cut off that connection, but it's hard when you have a daughter with somebody, right? And it was no longer through the state where he was getting visitations. I tried other ways to have him see her without me involved, but, he knew where we lived. He would show up whenever he wanted to. He would try to break in. He would try to, all these crazy things, and I just really wanted to get away from that, and I just remember, just praying to God, and I'm like, "Please just get me away from this situation." I was praying for stability too. I was a single mom, and it was hard for me. I'm not a person that likes to be alone, I wanted a family, craved, like, an actual man to come into my life, someone that God would send me that would be a godly person, a good, influence, and someone that would love my daughter and me. And so throughout this time where I was working at the wedding venue, I, started to kind of live again. I was out and I was doing things. I had really long shifts. I would be gone from like 10 or 11. in the morning to like 11 or midnight at night because I was, doing these really long weddings and it was a lot of weekends. So my parents would have my daughter, but it was a really good distraction until it wasn't because sometimes he would harass me at work or with calling me or, sending me messages. And I had to kind of have that connection so he could see his daughter, but I wasn't thinking like there was other ways to go through people. I did try to do that too, but it's hard, with my parents. They're the ones who watch my daughter and that's who I trust to watch my daughter. And so I didn't really want them to have to have that relationship with him and be close with him. It's almost like sympathizers with abusers. Like I kind of almost had that too. And they kind of didn't see everything that I saw and how I saw things or what I went through. And I tried to keep a lot of the details from them. And so I just didn't really know how to like cut that off completely. Looking back, I wish I would have tried to a little bit faster or sooner in a different way because he would harass me. And so the abuse just like, kept going on, whether he was physically abusing me or mentally. Um, Throughout that time, I believe that was about a couple years. So my daughter's about three now. I ended up meeting my husband and I met him at the wedding venue. He was a guest of a wedding and I normally don't, you know, entertain any kind of, talk from any of the guests, but it was almost like a godsend. I really feel like God had sent him to me that night. I was crying. I was hiding in my office crying that night because my daughter's dad was kind of trying to manipulate me and text me and just, all his ways. So I looked terrible, but my husband came up and started talking to me and he was just like, I have a daughter. And I was like, I have a daughter. And it just kind of, we kind of hit it off. And, he was trying to get my number. And I was like, I am not in any situation to get a number or talk to anybody right now. And so he gave me his business card and I thought that was that. And I was like, I'm probably not going to text you. I'm probably not going to call you. But then at the end of the night, he's helping the bride and groom pack up their things. And I worked at a garden venue. So there's like this trail that I have to walk up where my vehicle was. I ended up dropping the gate keys somewhere on the dark path and drove my car down to lock the gate. And I was like, oh my gosh, frantically looking for these keys. And he kind of comes up to me and he was like, what's going on? And I was like, I lost the gate keys out on this trail somewhere. And he goes, I'll go find them for you. And I was like, really? I was completely shocked. Yeah. So he goes on this trail
Oh,
looking for these keys for me and finds them and brings them back to me. And so I was like, wow, like, I don't know. It wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to give attention to the first guy that kind of like helps me out. It was really like a very profound moment for me. And I was like, God had to have sent this man to me. He just had to have. And I don't know if I actually really thought about it that second, but I was like, okay, I'm going to give him my business card. Okay. I'm going to give him my number and I'm going to give him a chance. I don't even know if I really thought that through that night, but I was just like, okay, here's my number. I don't know if I'm going to text you back, but so that's how I met my husband. A long story short, I did put him through it dating. It took him months to get me to actually go on a date with him. And I was so nervous. I was like sick to my stomach, but I was also happy at the same time. Right. And here we are. We're married. We have 2 kids together and, his daughter is, 17 now. My daughter's 14. We have the 2 teenagers, and then we have our 2 young kids, my 6-year-old son and my 2-year-old daughters. It's been really good. Life has been good.
what a beautiful way that God helped you out of that situation. Like, I feel like sometimes when we ask him for help, like you said, it took time. Not that your husband was your savior, but he was somebody that God
Yeah.
was showing you, this is how I want somebody to treat you. Like, they're going to help you.
Yes.
They're going to be there for you. They're going to be kind to you. Uh, so it's like, and I want to go back to in time. Sorry, sometimes I jump all over the place, but I was in an abusive friendship growing up. It wasn't like a romantic relationship, it was an abusive friendship. But the reason that I think I allowed myself to get into it was because I thought it was like my only option, like that I deserved to be treated that way. And I just settled with it and I had compassion for
Mhm.
this friend. So I wanted to help them. And so I stayed in it until I got counseling to give me the courage to get out of it. So going back in time, when you got into that relationship, the abusive relationship, you were younger. What about yourself drew you to that relationship, if that makes sense?
I was very impressionable, I guess. I was very young and naive. And, he was older. And a lot of my friends told me to stay away from him. And that was probably the reason why I gravitated. That's kind of what happens when you're young and you're impressionable. So it was kind of like a slow build getting in the relationship with him because I did kind of hesitate at first. But yeah, I was young. And that's kind of how also that's to just bring up his personality, the narcissistic person. They look for people that are weaker to prey upon, right? Even if they're doing it subconsciously, they're like, oh, I can easily make her do whatever I want her to do. Or, I think that he saw that vulnerability in me too. I don't know if he actually really thought about that or not,
Mhm.
but that's the reality, really. And um you know, that was, like, my whole 20s. I was 19 when I first met him, and it went on until I was, like, 26, 27. Off and on. I had my daughter when I was 23, so it was a good majority of my 20s, and if anybody, they know, you're pretty vulnerable and when you're in your 20s, especially to somebody that's a little bit older than you. So I think that's pretty much it. I was naive, very naive. I would never have pictured myself being in a relationship that allowed abuse like that. I was never taught that or, I did not grow up with that mindset at all. I was very stick up for yourself. I did all the sports in high school. I was a cheerleader. I was pretty outgoing. And so when that happened, it took, the life out of me, really. I wasn't the same person. The depression could be very debilitating. So that was the rough part. That really was. I mean, looking back, obviously going through the abuse was rough, but the after effects of having depression and battling depression, it never really fully goes away. It's definitely something that I work at. I don't feel like I have depression. I don't want to say that, but I feel like sometimes the enemy can slip in and I do have to work on like my mindset and my um deserving, do I deserve this? Am I worthy? And then also in the space that I am now, kind of like imposter syndrome, like who am I to, help other women or influence other women or, so I do have to work at that now. And um I do have to still unfortunately still have this person in my life because I have a child with him. I don't communicate as, I try not to communicate as much as possible. And now that my daughter is older and she's a teenager, she has, she communicates with him. I don't have to do as much. There are certain things that we do have to communicate about here and there, but I definitely keep boundaries. I keep walls. I keep, my distance as much as possible, but that is really hard. If I never had to see him ever again in my life, I always thought that that would be great, That would be the ultimate getting away from this person. But unfortunately, he's had to stay around and he's not around as much as a normal dad would be. I would say he sees my daughter maybe once a week, maybe every 2 weeks, a couple times a month. He's not very consistent, which of course I like. But for my daughter, you know, it sucks. I she she does know certain things about our past and our relationship. I haven't fully given her all the details about everything that's happened, but she does know that it was an abusive relationship. She does know a little bit about how her dad is because I've had to come out and tell her these things. He actually was in a relationship with somebody else, had a child with them, and then went to jail for the very same thing a few years ago. So, that had to be brought up because she ended up contacting me and was telling me the same stories, like my same story almost is happening to her or was happening to her. And
Wow.
a lot of people in his life try to cover up for him, and his mom tries to cover up for him, and fully well, like, knowing, what's going on and what he does. But she enables and covers up, and so I got to a point where my daughter was, I don't know, 12, I guess, maybe even 11. I don't know. She's very mature for her age, so I felt kinda comfortable, like, letting her know, like, "Hey, this is what's going on," you know? And so it sucks that I've had to do that. I didn't going into this, I never wanted to, like, ruin her relationship with him, but I also wanted to be very transparent about how I feel about him and my boundaries with him and what had happened a little bit, so she can kind of understand that I never want this to happen to her. And you know, that was like a major thing. I wanted to make
Right.
sure that she knows this is this will never happen to you, right? And that's something tried to establish with, both of my daughters that are teenagers now that can understand this. I want them to recognize these patterns, and I want once they start dating, I want them to be able to have that discernment, and so that's the reason why I ended up explaining this to my daughter a little bit, but she does still see him. Like I said, it's not very consistent, so that's the rough part for me. I have to he has to still be in my life in some way, in some
Right.
capacity, but my husband's helped me with that a lot too. That was another thing back then when, he would just show up at my house and he was still abusing me in other ways, and manipulating and trying to control my life. I desperately wanted to just cut that off. And so getting into a new relationship, he spiraled and realized he didn't have as much control over me anymore. And my husband ended up, having a conversation, and I didn't really want them to talk. I didn't know what was going to happen in that situation. And my husband's a very stand up guy, a very no nonsense kind of guy, and told him very, very straight up that you are not going to do this anymore. And I don't think that very many people do that to him because he's very controlling and manipulative, right? I think that that helped a lot. That helped establish the boundaries and cut that off, almost immediately after we started dating. My husband was like, this is not happening. And it was for me and for my daughter, and then obviously because we were trying to establish a new relationship, but he really did help me break that cycle, I think. I, I do know that God had sent him to me. I will always say that. So a lot of it is from the help of him. And after a while, he did let us move in with him. And that was the other official step, was moving to where he did not know where we lived. And then I had to try to establish, him being able to
Right.
see his daughter, which he just really wasn't around much when she was younger, which was better for us, and like I said, I didn't ever want to take that relationship away from her, but at the same time, wanted to protect her from the person that he was because how he is. And I do know that that is like the first step. Like if anybody is in a situation like that, whether it's physical or mental, and you can attest to that too. It's kind of like you got to get to a point where you just like you break free from that and you get out of that cycle, and you have to establish those boundaries. You have to cut off that connection and the way that they can contact.
Mhm. And for one, I'm sorry that you've gone through that and you're still having to deal with it. That is a lot.
I
So, you had mentioned that you don't want your daughter to fall back into the same pattern. You don't want her to get into an abusive relationship. So, were there red flags for you when you started dating your abusive ex? that you noticed, like these are blaring red flags, or were the red flags just kind of starting out like your friends were saying, we don't like him, there's something about him that's off? Do you identify what those cautions were?
Guess that would be the number one flag right there off the bat when your friends are telling you, stay away from this person because he's this way or that way. And honestly, they didn't know about the abuse part. They didn't really know about him being narcissistic or, that kind of way. He just was kind of got around with a lot of women. And so they would see that. He was in a band. And so that was the lifestyle. And so that was their warning to me. But in general, I guess you can say that kind of lifestyle is not something that you should gravitate towards. But also, listening to those friends and that instinct about someone and their character and what they do and how they are. And so the abusive part kind of came in later, and not to say that he wasn't abusing other women before me, which he was. I had been in contact with several of his exes actually, especially his firstborn daughter's mom. We ended up getting pretty close, but she never got physically abused. So it was just more of the mental and the controlling. And so that is, yeah, those things. He was very controlling, very didn't really want me to go do anything with friends. He would kind of, always wanted to know where I'm at, what I'm doing, who I'm with. If we were together and somebody would look at me like a guy, it would be my fault. And I was always to blame. I was always, wrong. He would just start fights out of nowhere sometimes. And sometimes I wouldn't even know like the source if it was just like something that he wanted to do. I don't really know why. Some of the behavior happened. Sometimes I know like, oh, I looked up randomly. And I got to the point where I was even like looking down a lot when I would be out in public because I wouldn't want to make contact with any man, any male, nothing, because he would always argue and start a fight with me. And, I'm just, seeking attention or, he's a very jealous person. And so he would be controlling with what I would wear, you know, and I didn't really let that happen as much. Like, I still wore what I wanted to wear, but he would say things and make comments, and like maybe I'd change like here and there, but that wasn't as bad. But just for him to say those things and that's a reflection of his own self. And he was very insecure. And that is kind of another problem. That's a big red flag. If there is a man that you're with that is an insecure man with his own self or has his own, problems and past relationship problems, they're going to come out in your relationship. And I wasn't aware of any of that. It just kind of slowly started, being a realization that he was insecure and that he was a jealous, insecure, controlling person. And so it would definitely be controlling and it would be, manipulative. It would be like, I don't know, the night that he came home and he was in a rage, he was lying and telling me that he was going to have his daughter and that he didn't want me to be there at the house. And I was there at the house because it was my house and I was there with the baby. And, he would just constantly lie about things. And that's another thing is he wasn't trustworthy. He did the very same things that he would accuse me of doing that he was doing. And I think everybody that's ever been in a relationship like that,
Yeah.
that's a very strong character trait of people like that. If there's a cheater that's cheating, they're going to accuse you of cheating, whether you are or not.
Yeah.
And I was definitely not that type of person. Like I said, I was even afraid to
Yeah.
establish eye contact with men when we were out in public because of how he would react to it. And there was a little bit of a drug and alcohol problem, but not like to where I felt like he was like an alcoholic, but he definitely would abuse things, to an extent and do drugs. And I never did the drug part. I would drink here and there when we'd be out with friends, but I was always afraid to do things like that because I could see how he was really. I don't know, maybe that was another God thing protecting me. I grew up with my mom and dad always telling us, don't do drugs, don't drink, most parents do, but, they really kind of drilled that into our heads. We have, a lot of family members and people that, were like that. And so they just wanted better for us. And so I guess having those foundations and growing up in childhood kind of kept me from that, which thank God, because I would be a different person. I definitely know that. Um, so there was definitely that little piece to him. That's why he did have to go through rehab. But that does not stop him to this day. For anybody that knows anything about alcohol and drug abuse, people can be completely different when they're not drinking and not doing drugs. And that was, that could be a good thing, but then there's always those underlying problems with, narcissistic people that have those personality disorders or
Right.
however you want to I'm not diagnosing him. I just kind of based off his behavior conclusions that I've come to. So that's always a thing. And then someone that has struggled with abuse or someone that has struggled with that dependency, he's always done drugs and drank since he was very young, like young teenager. So if it's a pattern in their life and they're a depressed person in their own right, then it's going to come back up. So I think he's gone off and on throughout the years, but the last kind of information that I heard, like when he was in jail for the last time for his ex, um, yeah, he was drinking and using, and then yeah.
So, were there still, like, the times when he was sober, were the red flags still there in different ways, or were they more hidden? Like, if he's I don't know if this is a stupid question, but, like, if he's sober and everything seems like he's a different person doing good, are red flags
Um,
about that narcissism, or is it more hidden?
had a really good like mask and like persona that he would put on. Like he can on the outside, he could seem like a nice guy, like a normal guy. And when things are good, things are good. And then, you know, every once in a while, there are things that would come out, kind of like the controlling or like the manipulative or even, the abuse part. When you're not drinking, he can still be like that. But he definitely hid things a lot. So on the outside, a lot of his friends, a lot of, people that knew us, especially his friends, it was all a front. And so, I was the one who knew about him and how he would be with me. And I wouldn't, if I would say anything or if anybody would kind of hear about how he would be, they would definitely kind of like try to cover up for him or kind of push that aside instead of helping. Nobody helped. Everybody that knew anything that was going on, close friends here and there that were his friends, just thought I was the problem. And that would be his story to anybody at any new girlfriend or anybody that would come into his life. I was the problem. And that would be the same thing that he would say about his other exes is that they were the problem. So
Yeah.
he had a good front, he has a good puts things
Right.
on and acts like he's this person, but on the inside, he is this dark person. He has no faith in God. He doesn't really have a direction for his life, still drinking and doing whatever and abusing women. He's been in and out of jail several times. There's been several times where we've broke up and got back together, and I've heard stories about another woman that he had abused or, so it's an ongoing cycle. I I don't know what is going to ever, if anything ever would get him out of that. Like I said, he doesn't believe in God. I don't know if there is any saving that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's the tricky question with narcissism because it needs like a radical transformation that only the Holy Spirit can do, right? Like, and then it's hard. God does change that person for the people that have been
Right.
affected by them to trust them, right? To trust them back in their lives, which I don't think they have to do that. That is between that person and God, their relationship with God, but that doesn't mean the people in their lives, even if that person does get help
Yeah.
from God, that they have to just let them back into everything, you know?
That's okay.
Sorry about my reception. Little choppy. Um, Thank you for sharing that. Do you have advice to somebody that abusive relationship right now, and they're realizing, "Hey, this isn't good. This isn't who I am. Like, I don't deserve to be
Yeah,
treated like this."
friends or family, first of all, lean on them and definitely let it be known your situation, because if you don't speak about it or tell anybody about it, then you won't get the help.
Yeah.
I also know there's so many resources now in cities and states and places wherever you are, even online. There's communities, there's places that you can reach out to safely. I know that a lot of abusers go through phones and, that kind of thing, but safely reach out to somebody. And if you can kind of establish a relationship with somebody, a counselor or any kind of resource, I would definitely go about that. And yeah, just recognize it for what it is. And I know it is hard to speak to somebody that is in a relationship and they're in that abuse cycle, because they won't necessarily absorb or accept the information unless they are point where they want to get out, or they want to end this, or they
Mhm.
recognize that it's not right. Because you can, like I said, I had
Mhm.
forgiven too many times and allowed him to come back in when I should have directly, stopped it in the beginning, before we even, um, got to the point where I had got
Mhm.
pregnant with my daughter. I should have stopped that cycle. Um, and just to allow that to go on, that just makes it worse. So, if there's any way that you can kind of get a little bit of a community, I know that abusers try to keep you away from people too, and that's hard. You're not normally as close to your friends and family. So,
Yeah.
anybody you feel comfortable reaching out to, I would establish that and
Mhm.
say, "This is the situation that I'm in," and then they can help you on your own. Allow somebody to help you, because it's not a way of living. It's not a life. It's really sad that women go through years and years, even their whole lives sometimes. I know there's married couples that are still together 20, 30 years, and they're still, whether it's the male or the female, husband or wife, it doesn't matter. I know that there's people that stay in those relationships, and it's not a way of living. It's not love, right? And my husband has showed me, and you know, what I thought was love, and I thought
Right.
I could never, I wanted to be with him because I had a daughter with him. I wanted to establish a family. I grew up as a Christian. I wanted to make that relationship work so bad. And I think that was another one of my struggles, is not getting out of it, is because I just wanted to make that work. And, it's you can make that work if that's the situation that you're in. So,
Yeah.
I would definitely encourage anybody to reach out. There's so many resources, like I said. There's the
Ye
domestic violence, community and initiatives. There's funding, you can go to school. There's so many options out there now, and I'm so grateful for them, because I don't know what would have happened, if I wouldn't have had those resources. And I wish that I could tell you that I am working with DV women. I really do. It's been something that has been on my heart for a really long time. And I do see something in the future. I honestly do. I would love to have like a nonprofit that helps domestic violence women and children. It's something, like I said, in my heart. So eventually, I would love to do something like that, because my focus right now is, health and wellness for women. And I partner with a wellness company. I'm more focused on like your mental health and health in general. Um, it's called Tox Free Mom, and it's, non-toxic products. That's kind of just like a little piece of the puzzle. Um, but I really want to focus, I want people and women to focus on themselves first. It's kind of like, putting like your mask on first. In, the airplane plane situation where they say put your mask on first, it's the same thing with women and a mom. If you're a mom, you have to take good care of your own mental health and your own wellness and your health first before you can be a good functioning mom. So, I try to help women realize like your health is in your hands and you're leaving a legacy for your children. You're leading by example. So if my children and my daughters see me take care of myself and protecting my sleep and my health, my mental, stability, they're more likely to grow up doing the same things. They're going to establish those foundations and my son too. And that's my responsibility to teach my son how to treat women and to take care of him and his mental health and his, if, there's ever, anger or anything that comes up, I want him to know that there are, things that he can work through. He doesn't have to be that kind of person or, same with my daughters, but um I also I homeschool my kids. My son and we have I'm a I got certified as a kids fitness instructor, so I have a kids faith-based fitness club. We call it the kids club. So we do that, and that's kind of teaching them to take care of their bodies and their spirit. And kind of we build in some character development and talk about Jesus and do like fun games. And they don't really know that they're working out and doing fitness as much as they're just running around and being kids and playing. So that is one thing that I have started that we've been really enjoying. It's been a great outlet for myself and my kids. So it's all about the health and wellness right now, really. And that's like all you have, right? Like that's a pillar in your life. That should be a pillar in your life, taking care of yourself, mentally and physically. So it's definitely something that I would love to, I passing on to my kids.
I love that. Going back to what you said about being in an abusive situation, telling somebody like that you trust, opening up about it. That is huge.
Mhm.
That abuser wants you to be quiet, stay silent, not tell anybody, knows only you, but actually telling somebody is huge. Like it's out in the open then, somebody knows it's not hidden and you can get the steps to start to get out of it. So I think that I love that advice that you gave. That is so huge for somebody in that situation.
The courage. And that's hard too, because if you're in that abusive situation and you are depressed, like you're down, you're not yourself, and you sometimes, like I said, they don't want the help because they don't realize they don't want out of it. They think this is the person I love. I love them so much. I would do anything for them. And then they're being abused, right? And it's hard to recognize it when you're in it. It's hard to see it for what it is
Yeah,
when you're in it. So kind of to that point
right.
where you can recognize it and then,
Yeah, sure.
seek help, right?
Yes, for sure. What is just real quickly before we go, what is like if somebody's in that situation and they want to like Google an organization, is there one that you would recommend that they like what are they
I
going to
don't
search
even really
online?
researched when I initiated that. And I know that each city has different organizations. So there's not like a national one that I can think of. But honestly, just even plugging in domestic violence help, right? And or your city or your state of where you are. Just but yeah, like I said, there's a lot there are a few programs where they have like quick exits. I'm not sure if you've heard of that before where it's like it will all of a sudden come up as like a website, like you're shopping for shoes or something. If your abuser comes in the room and they're very like, "What are you doing on your phone?" Or they can take your phone away from you. I heard of about that, and so I thought that was really cool and such a great resource for people. Um, I don't know what it's called though. I wish I was a little bit more prepared. I could have had that information, but if you search for things, Google and the internet is just so vast right now. So you'll able to find something.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that Google
Yeah.
domestic violence help in my area and then something will come up. That's great. I like that. Well, thank you so much, Vanessa, for coming on here and sharing your story and how you overcame and all the advice that you have and all the wisdom you have. And just thank you so much. so much wealth of knowledge that you
Well,
shared
thank
that
you,
is
Auntie, for
phenomenal.
having me. I'm here and share my story in hopes that it can even help one person. And like I said, it is a goal of mine to eventually be an even bigger resource for women that have experienced the
Uh,
same thing and something that I can share with my daughters and they could even help eventually with something like that.
yeah, that's awesome. I love that.